Hi, everybody. I like to start these kind of things, getting everyone to relax a bit. So give yourselves a round of applause for just being here today. I think it's always nice for just being here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today for London Gallery Weekend. Today, as we've heard, I'm joined by Abraham Kritzman, whose work is shown alongside Van Snick's, and Benedicte Goesaert, an art historian specialising in contemporary art post-1989 and the manager of Van Snick's Estate. Also joining us is Joe Lawson-Tancred, the author of AI and the Art Market, who has written the accompanying essay to Plus Days and Plus Nights, which Abraham told me has only ever been written down. No one has had to say the name of this exhibition out loud before, so I had to check whether is it Plus Days, Plus Nights, or Add Days, Add Nights. So that was a lot of pressure, and I'm glad that it's done now. Abraham, let's start. So Van Snick passed away in 2019. What has it been like putting your work in dialogue with a deceased artist, and particularly a recently deceased artist?
I'm going to start with the studio, actually, because in my artistic practice I go and see things which belong to the past, like archaeology, and I do a lot of pilgrimages, and I visit places of layered history, and mostly what I do is I have an encounter with something outside in the world, and then bring it back to the studio, and then kind of bring the two elements of time together, the past and the present in the studio. And then in the exhibition there is a new kind of now, which is where you are looking at the work, which has these two different time separations going back. And then working with Philippe's work is a little bit like that. I mean, because he's passed away, I don't have the opportunity to have a discussion with him, and mostly, I mean, I think as long as an artist is alive, he has a say, or like he has a way of placing how he wants things to be in the world. And I found, not consciously, that I'm treating this discussion a little bit like I do with other elements from my artistic practice. And that was very interesting, and I think I kind of realized it only at the end of the process, because I was just looking at his work and trying to realize how do I respond to it. So it's a little bit like the things that I've encountered along the places that I find my materials usually. And another part of it is the way that a discussion happens with someone who's passed away, and I think we all have people who passed away in our lives, and we start having this inner dialogue where you pretend to be the other person, or try to imagine what the other person would say in relation to something that you think or say. So for me that was a very kind of personal and maybe a little bit emotionally complicated, because we've never met, so I had to imagine the whole personality and everything about him. And so every work that I did, and there's other works that didn't get into the show, was trying to hold both ends of the conversation, also what I would imagine he would think or say, and what I wanted to do and make. I don't know about the recent part, because I mean, we haven't known each other. I knew his work for many years. I was introduced to his work by one of my tutors when I was in BA, and I'm still in good relation with this tutor, and when I told him that I'm going to show with Philippe, he was like, oh wow, amazing, incredible, and he started telling me more and more. And he was saddened to hear that he passed away, but I mean, I don't know if it would have mattered if it's an artist from 200 years ago or someone who passed away last year.
Joe, a kind of similar question for you, but in the context of writing about an artist practice who sort of isn't available to give sort of direct feedback to you or more information to you? What's that like?
Yeah, well, when I was approaching the essay, my first thing I did was call Abraham, which I could ask hyper-specific questions, and that was obviously, I felt an immediate confidence comparatively in that part of the writing process. When it came to Van Snick's work, I was very lucky because Benedicte gave some time on the phone, and there's one, actually I think that you helped me find as well, a really great YouTube video where he talks in quite a general, it's not necessarily about a specific work, he talks about his practice generally, and I felt that was very helpful to really understand what he would pull out and if he had given 5 minutes to talk about his work, which I think was the length of the video, what he thinks is the fundamental message underlying it all, which was a good steer in terms of kind of getting to grips at least with that. There's some great catalogues, lengthy tomes, which I was reading, and when something's quite conceptually dense, you don't really want to read it once. So there would be passages I'd sort of read maybe a couple times to really grasp them. But I think there's elements of his work that overlap with minimalism, which I'd studied, and then generative art, which I've written a lot about. So I think the key thing was to really pinpoint what made his work so idiosyncratic, which it is, rather than kind of use knowledge about movements, with which it does have some alignment, but doesn't entirely kind of align with, to fill in gaps, which, yes, thankfully there was a lot of great material out there, so I was able to do that. But yes, a lot of reading, I would say, was the main way.
Benedicte, I personally would be very interested in hearing what is involved with managing an artist's estate, and what was involved for selecting the artworks that came here for this show.
Well, thank you also for all the attention for the artist, and I think the estate deals with a lot of questions about life, death, what does it take to keep the work alive, and that is also why for the estate it was so exciting to actually get this invitation, because Philippe was also, as an artist, somebody who had a lot of contacts with other artists, who liked to be in touch with the younger generation, and a lot of his work also, as we will talk about, is also about duality, life, death, day, night, so all these contrasts. So all of a sudden we are in the moment like, okay, but what happens when the artist is no longer there? How do we look to it? And as an estate, of course, you deal with emotions, because the artist passed away in 2019, quite recently. I was invited by the family, the wife of the Philippe Van Snick, Benedicte Goesaert, to join the estate, because there are so many questions. And what is so interesting, the way we talk now about the work, is there's a difference in approach. Like, as long as the artist is alive, we tend to want to understand or look to the works through the eyes of the artist. But what if he is no longer there? What is the position of responsibility? And in his work, it always has been important to him to have these ideas and notions of dynamic world, dynamic vision. So he really wanted that it's not fixed. And now we are like, okay, how do we deal with it? What do we take? What it is about? So as an estate, what does it take? Like, there's different steps. There's also like, we open a studio, we open boxes. Like Philippe Van Snick, he was a creator. He loved to work. I think you can relate to that as an artist. But he was not so much into archiving and inventory. It's also like a generation who was, who was more in the creation than all the logistics around it. So we are now like, okay, what is this? So we are also making the inventory of the works that are still in the studio. And at the same time, so it also is dealing with emotions, also for the family, because the art world looks to these works from a place of distance. But also for the wife, she sees a lifetime. She sees the moment something was made, where they were, what was happening. So that's very interesting in that shift. And about how this exhibition came together for us, Yeah, we were very open. We really listened also to the gallery, what they wanted to do. We looked into the work of Abraham. And I think it's always a question of, in such an exhibition, also seeing the space, because relation to space is also very important to Philippe. Like, how can you make choices that each artist and each artwork can stand out? So we were also in this idea of duality, looking for contrasts. So that is something, a principle that is very much part of his practice. But I think what is also interesting in his work is that, like you mentioned already, he has an interest in minimalism, but we never can reduce his position to that. So he's, at the same time, he makes choices, but then he escapes them also. So the, let's say, the ideas of freedom and dynamic perception is very important. So he is, in his practice, he tries to avoid dogmas or certainties. So there's always ideas of stability and instability. So therefore, we were very attracted by how the work of Abraham has these organic shapes, a lot about texture, and therefore we thought like, okay, let's then, because of course the work of Philippe spans many decades, so we were like, okay, let's go for the contrasts, for the more minimal works of Philippe. Yeah.
Abraham, when it came to creating and selecting your works to go in this show, is there one in particular that you think sort of joins you to Van Snick more than others? Is there one that stands out for you in terms of that connection?
I mean, both these works were made in knowing that we're going to do this show and in conversation. But I would say that the aluminium works, which are also called 10 Sides of Love, they are, in a way, in the methodology of how they're made in the studio, even though they look very, I don't know how to describe them, organic or flowing or poetic maybe, they have a very strict way of building them. There's a set of rules, there's a set of dimensions, there's a very rigid process in making them, which in a way is very similar to how Van Snick was working. So there's an image. I don't know if to elaborate a little bit on how they're made and why.
But Abraham, it would be fascinating to actually hear how these sculptures are made, because then I'm going to ask Joe, and maybe you guys can kind of collaborate on this answer, I guess, about what stood out for you as the most obvious link between Abraham and Van Snick's work, and is that something to do with that sense of sort of rigidity and order and sort of a rule?
Yes.
Yeah, well, when I first got the task to write an essay about both practices, I was a bit sort of panicked and unsure of how to draw a connection, because as you will see and can see, on the face of it, they're quite different works, and one is much more geometric and pared back, and one is much more gestural. But I think through my research and speaking to Abraham, it became clear that these weren't sort of initiated in an abstract land. They are responses to the real world, and taking a real world source material and filtering it through the artist's own personal framework or language that in that sense is abstracting, but the original source material can be found there in elements that are embedded. So in that, I think once you realise that, which I think is very much similar to what Abraham was saying, the idea of the framework, the rules that are the artist's own, but are their way of kind of processing this source material of the outside world, then it's actually kind of exciting that they look different, because it's far more interesting to think of how two different artists would approach something and end up with such different results. But I think where Van Snick talks a lot about the element of randomness that's brought into the framework, so you can't just have the framework to provide all the variation that we see in his different works. There's something else a more chance element that, yeah, it results in potentially infinite variety. And whilst that seems like a kind of arty conceptual notion, it of course does map on to everything really, because everything is a set of rules that is capable of producing lots of variations. So it really connects to nature. The more you kind of dive into the concepts, it connects to nature, or both practices I think connect to nature in the real world in a way that isn't immediately apparent, but was very rich to explore in the essay.
Yeah. Benedicte, do you think that a new side to Van Snick's work is being illuminated in this exhibition?
Actually, the works here are quite essential to understand the work. So maybe it's new to the context of London, but actually like these works, and I know people look like, oh, it's painted cardboard. But it's like 40 years old, so look how shiny and good they are. People are always cardboard and conditions. But what is essential is like, we have here an iconic principle in the work. So we have the 10 colors, and that's something he introduces in '79 with the word color system. And for him, he was not really looking into personal expressions, emotions of colors, because colors can have so many different ways of reading them, culturally or emotionally. But he was more like, okay, I want a kind of like distant connection to colors, so I just take the standard variations of red, yellow, and blue, purple, pink, purple, orange, and green, then white and black, and then gold and silver. So that's like a bit the big system. And in '84, he introduces this beautiful light blue. But for him, putting the light blue and the black next to each other is talking about day and night. So in a way, for him, that's a continuity. It's like, if there's one thing that we are sure about in life, is that we live and we die, but also that there's always a day and a night. And it keeps coming, no matter what. So in a way, that's a very like, and the principle was developed in his practice '79, '84. And here we have works of '85, so it's really, really key. Also, the bigger work there, Symmetric, Asymmetric, is on panel, is also dealing with that principle. So I would say we were rather selecting works that kind of touch the core of his practice. But then towards the later works, the allies that we see at the other wall there, we see that he also grows in his work and his life and allowing more nuances. So there he would, like the day or the night, he would paint it with more depth. It becomes almost like landscape-like, something he would never do in the 70s. So that's also what you see. Maybe he touches again with his passion for painting also, because that's how everything started.
I love mentioning the cardboard sculptures because I don't think I've ever been so nervous to be sat near something in a show as 40-year-old cardboard near some liquid. I'm feeling quite tense. Abraham, we touched briefly on the sense of order and randomness, that duality. Do you ever find it hard to allow yourself to relax into that randomness, or does the randomness or the is there these sort of warring factions between structure and letting yourself loose? Is there ever like is it a battle or is it easy?
It is. It's I call it brackets. Like I create these brackets of the brackets are also a structure where I can have a bit of wildness or adventure or chaos or. So these pilgrimages, for instance, they're brackets. It's a period of time and place where anything can happen and I don't know what I'm going to encounter. And also in the studio, with the metalworks, for instance, there's a bracket of size and material and general shape, but then I don't really know how I'm going to react to the source material. To the things that I brought into the studio. And my biggest joy is this element where now I have to commit to something, I won't be able to change it afterwards, this is how it's going to be, there's a one chance of doing it. So there's a very radical essence of chance in there. And then at the same time, it's inside a structure, and I don't think that without this structure I would have been able to have any creativity. And also I think the poetic expression can only happen within a framework. It would be really hard for me to, like, this endless possibility of doing anything is it's too much in the studio. Yeah, I don't know. I can give an example of the little ceramic pieces. They are little areas where I can play, but the materials that I work with, they're heavy metals that when fired they change their color. So I don't know what it's going to look like after it's fired. And I was really interested in putting those works next to, we can't see it from here unfortunately, but the works behind where there's pieces of clouds, or I think they're clouds, where it feels to me a little bit like what he does. He makes this area, like a defined space where he can experiment, go wild, and I think clouds are the wildest. They can be anything. They can be dreams. They're places for imagination. So these kind of brackets for me are where imagination can go in. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Joe, I think that lots of us who will be doing sort of pilgrimages around London Gallery Weekend are going to see quite a lot of shows that are centred around either hanging pieces or installations. I feel like I'm seeing quite a lot of shows with that being like the heart of the show. What do you think it is about installation work that's particularly grabbing audiences right now?
Yes, well, I think there's a sort of obvious pleasure in being able to navigate something yourself and not have it fed to you in a way where it's like you absolutely must experience it like this and this is the only way. And I know Abraham was working in ways that are from which this has evolved, for example using wooden frames, I believe, beforehand. So it wasn't something that was new for this show, but we talked quite a lot about Van Snick, who was probably decades earlier kind of adopting and was very interested in installation and very involved in the curation of his shows. And I think there's quite good documentation around that. So obviously an interest in installation has been the case for a few decades now. But I think it was one of the key points of the essay really was comparing this installation with some of Van Snick's past ones, and Van Snick was very interested in the ability to navigate a space, and here you can't see the whole show. I mean, we can't see the whole show right now. You literally have to navigate it, so you can't be lazy about it. To see it all, and I saw it kind of connecting it therefore to Van Snick and his interest in that as well. I see it as a different kind of framework on a bigger level, where the artist has created the installation and then the element of randomness is kind of how you decide to navigate it. So it's echoing in that way, I think, the production of the works, which I think is quite a nice idea, yeah.
Benedicte, I have a question for you about where you think this exhibition sits within an art historical context. We've touched on Van Snick's interest in minimalism. The exhibition sort of reminds me of this, probably a video I saw of someone speaking about the fact that there are so many concurrent trends happening at the moment that we're sort of in this very strange time where everything is in. There's nothing that's out of fashion now because everything is happening at the same time. And I just wonder whether this exhibition is a good example of this sort of movementlessness we're kind of currently experiencing, or do you feel like this work is really firmly grounded in an art historical era?
No, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think there are different layers of answering it. I think first it starts also culturally. We've been raised for a very long time to look at art history from a very Western perspective. We're totally opening it, luckily. And I think also in there, Philippe Van Snick always had this interest in looking to the world, this dynamic worldview also, so there's not one position. But what you see is the moment that he is trained in the 60s, he started with a strong connection to painting, but he was very well aware of what happened internationally. That was the minimal and more conceptual period. So he also decided at the time not to paint at all. And he became part of that movement, that attitude, you could say. But then at the same time, he also allows painting again, and then he does his own way with it. So he allows that kind of freedom, and I think it's very beautiful how the essay of you also starts about this contradiction between like a kind of system, but at the same time that system creates freedom. And that's also very much what it's about. And what I like about the display here, we both have works of Philippe at the two walls that goes about the day and night principle, and here it's really still the duality, but at the other side it becomes about nuances. So things are not black and white or this or that. So and I think that's also what is in the work of Abraham. And when we had a call, we were talking about it, how even today there's always like so many different options, so many different possibilities. And even like, is it about truth? Is it about so many things? It's not this or that. There's always this way in between. And even in the question of duality, you can't think about duality and the contrasts without thinking about everything that exists in that space in between. And that's also what Philippe in a way is exploring with symmetric, asymmetric also. There's things in that space, in this relation to time. So in that way, I think Philippe reflects also that, coming from the 70s where there were bigger principles, like you had to choose, do you like this music band or the other one, and now you can have different things together. And I think he kind of, we see that curve, that change through all the years. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you another question straight away because it's become too predictable of me going up and down the line, which touched on when you were asking these sort of these questions that one might have when you move around the exhibition. What question do you think it would be worth viewers holding in their minds as they go through the exhibition that you think might most help illuminate the works for them?
Mm-hmm. I think a question about position could be an interesting one, like from which place do you look to the work, not only spatially, but even maybe what is your mood today, what is happening in your mind, and also like if you go closer or you go further away, and you can just look technically, okay, cardboard, paint, I can do it myself too. But of course here we see painting on different materials, cardboard, panel, canvas. So that's also a big question, like why does he explore like all these different elements? And that's also something that for him was important. He grew up in this moment in the 60s, 70s that we were questioning, okay, the materiality of art, going away of like the more bourgeois, elite, bronze and marble things. So cardboard really has a conceptual layer of like economy also, questions about economy, about power, about value. So I think try to see in the moment where you are today, and also like, yeah, I would say like come also at night and see how it is, but you can actually if you come from the window. So even if you come back and you think it is simple, the more you interact with it, things can change also in your mind, because it can be complex to be simple.
That's wonderful. Joe, this question is sort of about your writing practice. I mean, your essay for the exhibition started with this brilliant Van Snick quote, you have a lot of freedom within a discipline, but there is a framework, which Abraham touched upon in your own work. What frameworks do you obey in your writing practice?
Well, kind of like Abraham was saying, I think you need one, and that's across any kind of creative discipline. Of course, within journalism, you need one much more, because I suppose art is just a creative endeavour, whereas some writing is more functional, and then it's really about laying out that information and getting it out in a way that's clear. But that still leaves room for having a bit of fun with the material when it's appropriate. But you wouldn't really want to do that if people weren't following or had been switched off, because there's nothing worse than something that rambles on incoherently without structure. So I think it would apply to creative writing of any kind. But yeah, as long as you can sort of snatch them hopefully at the beginning and figure out what your main points are, I guess somewhat in order of importance, and lay them out. Once you get the knack of it, I think you don't have to think about it too much, and then you probably are kind of innovating creatively on that structure.
Yeah. So it's the structure, even if initially it seems like quite an active, like I need to think about this structure, where eventually it's like, oh, that's just part of the
sure.
framework.
Yeah, I remember starting out, there are things that would take hours to write because you really haven't got the hang of it yet, whereas now it's second nature. Thank God.
Abraham, this is my last question for you before we open up to questions from the floor. This isn't your first exhibition with Elizabeth Xi Bauer. How does this exhibition mark either a change or maybe a turning point in your career, or what does this pinpoint for you, this exhibition in particular?
Interesting question. It's a hard one.
Yeah. That's why I came back down the line for this to be the last one.
I mean, turning points are things that usually you see when you're looking back. And I really like looking back. This is what I do in the studio. And I think turning points for me are usually in the studio. They're not exhibitions. There's moments where you suddenly find something incredible and then you stop doing what you did before, and now you're 90 degrees or 180 degrees doing something completely different. And for me, if I would think about this exhibition, I was trying to continue my previous solo show with the gallery Land's End with another structure that I've made. But maybe the turning point was in the way that I was making the work, because like everything is handmade and has my personal touch, but then they all have a secondary stage where somebody else had to continue it and finish it. For instance, the aluminium works, so I did all the work in wax. It didn't look like this at all. It was green, and the materiality is completely different. And then Catherine was in charge of making it into aluminium, and then I just had to trust her skills. And the same thing happened with the screen. I've personally hand carved the whole panels and the ceramics. Everything has my I've touched all of it, but then the structure itself was made by Ollie, and so I've never seen the exhibition before. And there was this moment where things had to be decided in advance and then shown here. And I think this is maybe a turning point where I kind of let loose production of some of the things to other people that I trust, and I can kind of see it assembled in the space, not just in the studio and then shipping the whole thing somewhere. And yeah, I think this is the major thing for me with this show. Apart from the dialogue with Van Snick, of course, it's interesting, and it was maybe a year and a little bit of working and thinking about his work, and but in turning point, I don't know yet. I don't know how to look at it now. So
you have to email all of us when you've worked out what it is.
For sure.
It feels like that plays into this theme of duality that's come up a lot in this talk, of the sense of the control that you have, and then that's at play with the lack of control because someone else is going to take the baton on and see where they go with it.
And also I had to decide in advance how everything's going to be. I mean, in terms of curating the show, we had to sit with Maria and everybody else and kind of think, okay, this goes here, so then we have to make sure all the fixings are right, the length of it, all the technical things have to follow. And it's also a new place for imagination, because you don't imagine something and react to it in the studio immediately. You have to project how the show is going to be. And also with Philippe's work and also with mine, the relationship between the objects and the paintings is really important with the symmetrical work or here. And to try to imagine it in advance was a project of imagination, I think, and that's maybe a turning point. Yeah.
But I think the curation does such a good job of bringing out similarities in the practices with the mirroring of these hanging works in these ones, and those ones with scattered elements.
That's it. Yeah. We're going to open up for the next 10 or 15 or so to questions from the floor. Yes.
So I came in early and looked at the exhibit and have a totally different perspective now. And the issue about duality and installation together, because the aluminum pieces really are duality, because you've got the concave on the one side that if they were against a wall, you would never see the reverse image of what you've done. So I think that's a really amazing way to display it, because it makes everything looks different. I never thought it would look different, but this was fantastic. So it's not a question, I just wanted to say I appreciate the way it was all laid out, because it really did change my perspective.
Questions or compliments, we'll take, we'll take anything. Yeah.
But I think it's beautiful you mentioned that, because in the end also, I think for you the same, there's not one way of looking to it. So that's also what was so important for Philippe, is that there's not one way. There's also, he actually avoided questions about interpretation. So he had a few keys that at times he would give people, but in the end he was often more curious, like, what does it do for you? What do you experience? So he would try to understand what's happening within you, what the work gives to the people, instead of saying this is it. So very nice you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yes.
I think the confrontation between the two artists is spectacular. Beautiful. I have a question for Benedicte. How did you choose the work? Because you know you're the curator of the studio, the artist. How did you choose those works, the conversation with Abraham?
Well, it was also a conversation with Maria.
Conversation, dialogue with him?
It was a conversation with Maria, with you, and also there are so many possibilities, because Philippe also has a very conceptual practice with photography, installations, but at the same time it's one room, so you have to make choices. So we could not do, like a couple of years ago, there was a big retrospective or overview, I couldn't say retrospective, overview exhibition. So how do you deal in one space? You have to make sharp choices. So it was like starting with a long list and then saying, okay, you try to, focus, more focus, and then that's where we get, yeah.
I can elaborate on my part, because I mean we had a very long discussions about what Philippe's work is for us, and through these discussions we've decided not to show the photographs, for instance, because for me it was important that there would be a here and now, and there's something about photography which takes you to a different place and a different time. And even though I adore his photographs, we've decided that there shouldn't be any photographs in this show, because we want people to interact with this more in a kind of an installational manner. So that was one kind of decision, for instance. And then another subject that we discussed was keeping the types of work together or to separate them. So that was a discussion that Ed was part of as well. And for me it was important, because I was looking at all his previous exhibitions and I thought, well, he never mixes them up. Like, it's not like you would have a show with one of this work and then half of that and then another one. There's this, and I think he was really interested in having the intensity of this approach in his work displayed. So it was important for me also to maintain that, and I thought it would be kind of giving him the respect of, this is the dialogue that I was having with him, you know, like I think this is what he would have wanted.
I think what is also nice is even the idea of like painting, sculpture, even that is being stretched, like in a way, spatially, Philippe is on the walls, you're within this space, so that's already interesting. Like, what is a dialogue? It can be like next to each other, but this is a very interesting spatial conversation. And then also seeing with these works, for example, where is the edge of painting? Is this now more sculptural or painterly? And at the same time also with your installation and the ceramics, they're sculptural, but they're also very painterly. So also seeing where are the borders, where do certain practices or gestures meet each other. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing that contemporary art, I think, sometimes has to, or abstract art has to tackle with, that idea that actually you do get so much more from it when you look deeply, and if you do a bit of reading, but fundamentally if you interact with it on a deeper level. Because I think that a lot of people who are quite frightened of abstract or contemporary art, helping people to like find a way into that feels like it must be a tussle for artists who aren't making like, this is a painting of some flowers, like that when you need to have like a bit of more of a...
I have a friend who's a ceramicist, and I'm very jealous because he goes to his studio and he knows this is going to be a cup and this is going to be a vase and this and I go to the studio and I'm like, I don't know what this is. Yeah. It doesn't have a name yet.
Yeah. We'll take, you had a question, we'll take these two questions and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, when Benedicte said apply the position that you come with, so I haven't been to the gallery yet and the artist, but it was mentioned to me, and I was really intrigued about the application of number series and colour series. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because I'm interested in numbers, numerology, and I think of colour as an energetic, having an energetic impact.
Yeah.
But when you described it, it sounded like quite an arbitrary, let's take some primary, let's take some secondaries. So do you have any more insights into that? What the selection and the numbering has all the significance around that?
So for him it really becomes from a place of research and also mathematics, and how we try to understand the world is through science, is through structure. So also in numbers. And he says actually if we just look from the number 0 till 9, we can make an infinite amount of kind of numbers, kind of systems. So it comes from that place. But it's also like a generation that, we had like in the 50s, early 60s, we had the abstract expressionism, we had Pollock, we had like all these expressions, all these emotions. And at the same time, there comes this moment that artists also look to the world and the work from a scientific place, you could say, but also that artists also have an intellectual side. I would not say that he was busy with like energetic sides of it. He had an interest in contemplation, we see in certain elements. So, but at the same time, it's like he would never pin these things down. So it's more the systematic, of course. And then again, he plays because he has series like a kind of cipher code. And then he refers also to Arabic mathematics, like he would have a form, it's only a curl, and that's a 0. Then you have an angle, that's a 1. You have a form with 2 angles, that becomes a 2. And then these exist in variations of the 0 can be once a red, the other times yellow. So it becomes a very playful and also in the space. So again, he says like with color, there can be variations. So for a long time in his practice, it was always a kind of more standard color to kind of dissociate emotional associations, but open up, like you say, like red can indeed have a certain impact, and we have all kind of theories of color. But then towards the end of his life, or also because of something that happened in his personal life in the mid-90s, he started mixing all the colors in different proportions. And then we start realizing, okay, something happens. And that's also what we see in the series Allies. We see a bit of pinkish, we see other kind of nuances, and he confronts that with then sometimes these more, you could say neutral colors or standard colors. So what happens in this? But it is interesting what you mentioned and what it can indeed like interact, how we can look like some people maybe have run away from green and somebody else has maybe a childish memory about like, oh, green always has been my favorite color. So it's also, and that's what he finds interesting, because of sometimes allowing more standard colors, he also gives a certain freedom to the viewer. So I think there's not one answer again, but very interesting, yeah. So it's again about possibilities, potential, yeah.
We'll take our last question if you want to ask.
I have a question for Abraham. I hope I'll be able to explain it in English because that's not my English. When we talked about duality and the communications between two works of art or two artists, could you elaborate a little about what this has brought to you? I mean, you have the question that you already asked, but what the work of Van Snick did to your work in the sense of synergy, maybe. And the other question that follows, out of that, would you be able to exhibit this in another space, in another place, without the work? And is it then still a body of work that speaks for itself?
Yes. I'll start with the second part. Yes, I mean, I like the word constellation and not installation for my works. So at the moment they're arranged in a specific way to create tension and do all the things that we discussed. But I do like to have things fragmented into smaller bits so that they could be rearranged in a new constellation in another space. So that's one part of that question. While the aluminium works, I would like to show together as one unit because it is one big image that's chopped up into 10 pieces. While the big panel, even though it comes together to one mural, I would be very happy to show them separately as well. I think I was more aware through working with him at things that I was doing anyway, so it was more like emphasizing elements. And for instance, for a long time I was working a lot with doubling and symmetry, and I've decided not to work with doubling and symmetry for this exhibition because I didn't want to repeat too much. I knew that his work is talking a lot about symmetry, and I thought, okay, maybe duality should come from two sides in a different kind of way. So in a way, the dialogue was also, okay, this is very too close, maybe I do something else. I approach some interests from a different angle. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I can't say like, oh, I'm taking this green, or I'm taking. It's something more. I think in the different methods that you do in the studios that I kind of drew from him, rather than the way things look or appear. I don't like the word strategy or anything like that, but maybe methodology.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to our panelists.